Been at your employer for more than 2 years? It's time to look for a new job, and let me explain why. Hey everybody, it's Brian from A Life After Layoff, and today I want to share with you why it's important to look for a new job at least once every 2 years. And this is especially true even if you're satisfied in your current role. But before we get into that, if you're interested in learning how to reclaim control and start to act like the CEO in your career, make sure you sign up for my free weekly newsletter. And in it, I share concise, actionable tips on how to reclaim control and start to act with more authority. So if you're feeling stuck in your career, that's the newsletter for you. And keep in mind, it's absolutely free. So I hope to see you there. All right. So if you're familiar with my channel, you may have seen this other video on why a steady job is bad for your career. And if you're not familiar with it, it's definitely worth a watch. So go ahead and check that one out first, then you can come back here. But basically the point of the video is to encourage people to not get too complacent in their career and allow the market to pass them by. Now that goes for career progression, but it also goes for compensation. And I'm a firm believer that if you want to act like the CEO of your career or that free agent, you always want to make sure that you're keeping tabs on the market and seeing what it's doing. And if you're staying in a job for too long, the market tends to pass people by. And let me give you a little anecdotal story here. So I was speaking with somebody recently who had spent the last 7 to 8 years in their current employer. By all accounts, they're a top performer. They've been promoted a few times, and they're relatively happy in their role. However, the broader department has encountered nearly 100% turnover in the last 18 months. And you have to keep in mind, this is in the medical field, and there is a high demand for the type of work that they do. So it's not all that uncommon for an employee to move from one job to another in this market and test the waters. And realistically, if you're unsatisfied with something about your job, it doesn't take most people in this particular industry to find another position, even in today's market. So not wanting to be left out and probably to some degree being recruited through their network, they ended up getting a couple of opportunities where they went through an entire interview process. And at the end of the interview process, what they found was something very interesting. They ended up getting an offer that was $5 an hour more than they were currently being compensated, but it came with some baggage. And unfortunately, it would mean a much longer commute. However, $5 an hour is nothing to sneeze about, and they ended up going back to their employer and letting them know that they had an intention of leaving. And then something really interesting happened. Their current employer ended up giving them a $15 an hour raise. And when I asked the question of, well, why did they do that? They said that it was because they didn't want to lose any other people in the department, and they wanted to make sure that she would stick around. Why does it seem like employers wait around till people are literally leaving the department, tendering their resignation in order to do the right thing and pay people properly? And the second part of that is, were they really trying to retain these employees, or were they underpaying people so significantly, and maybe nobody complained about it, and especially in a tight labor market, that they could get away with it, and they started realizing that people are no longer tolerating it, and there's a mass exodus. So was this person drastically underpaid to begin with, or was the company trying to do the right thing and really retain their top talent? It's probably a combination of both. Because ultimately, when you look at how companies approach pay philosophy, there are pay leaders and there's pay laggers. And of course, the pay leaders want to do the right things by retaining their talent. They can go and poach other people's talent because they pay them more. And there's other companies that have adopted a pay lagger compensation philosophy where they don't care if they have turnover, and that's kind of built into their model. However, at some point, you need to retain your intellectual knowledge, they call it tribal knowledge, and the skills that you have. And if you're constantly replacing people, it actually becomes much more expensive. Not only the recruiting cost, but also the cost to train people, and what's the cost of lost knowledge and experience. But nonetheless, they accepted the counteroffer and decided to stay with their organization for the $15 an hour, which on some level, I certainly can't blame them for doing that. And the reason that they gave was that the company was trying to retain them because they had such high turnover and that they're really familiar with the processes, and it's kind of like a comfortable, almost like a devil that you know is better than the devil that you don't. Because let's face it, you can jump ship and go to another company and the grass oftentimes is not greener, because you may have thought you had it really bad, but you might jump to another company and realize that, man, I actually had it pretty good where I was. And inevitably, they'll try to go back to the original employer. That's called boomeranging. And we've been seeing an increase in that as well, especially people who have participated in the Great Resignation And they go and they find out, hey, these big salaries are great and all, but suddenly they realize the work isn't quite as fulfilling as they had hoped. And there's a lot of dysfunctional companies out there. And even though I don't generally recommend that you accept a counteroffer for a variety of reasons, and you can check out another video that I made that breaks that down in case you're interested. I'll leave a link down below in the description of the video. But in this case, $15 an hour, that's a tough one to pass up. And if you're comfortable where you are, you've built up the equity, you've got vacation time, vested 401ks and other things, and you know who your coworker, well, at least the ones that are remaining, you know who the coworkers are, you know the work processes. And some people just don't want to go through that. Let's face it, going and onboarding at a new company is a real pain in the butt, and I don't think anybody particularly enjoys feeling like the new person. It brings up the concept of testing the open market, but I think it's a really important strategy that everybody should be practicing. Even if you're satisfied with your current employer, you should be at a minimum every 2 years going and testing the open market. Put some applications out, maybe connect or network with some recruiters in your space. And the purpose is to keep tabs on what's going on in the market. Go through an interview process, see what kind of skills they're asking for, see how they're assessing you, and make sure that you're getting the right things in your current position. And more importantly, if you can get to the point of offer, you can at least start to have the salary discussions, you can determine whether or not you're underpaid to the market. And I'm not necessarily saying that you should use a few dollars an hour every time to go to your current employer and say, hey, I just got this other offer, because eventually your company's going to call the bluff and go, okay, you should go take it. So you got to be prepared for that. But I do think it's really important to understand where the market is trending. And if you're somebody that's been in a role for a long period of time, inevitably the market will pass you by. Because what happens is, as companies continue to hire in new talent from outside the market, you all hear these 10%, 15, 20% raises that people are getting when they're jumping from job to job. But where do you think that money's coming from? Your current company is probably doing the same thing. In order to stay competitive, they have to pay more and more. And when you look at entry-level jobs, for example, the market continually moves up by a certain percentage. If they're trying to be competitive, especially pay leaders or even companies that are in the mid, kind of their pay philosophies in the mid, they have to stay competitive. And so the wage increases may be bigger outside of the company than it is for the internal people, the people that are there. And usually when you work at a company, you might get a promotional bonus once every few years where you move from level to level, and you might see maybe a 5%, maybe 7% bump, at best maybe 10%. But the market over that same period of time is moving up. So you could be working in a job for 5+ years, and somebody brand new who has no experience is coming in, sitting at the cube next to you, and they're making the same, if not more than you are. But if your salary growth is only through small incremental cost of living adjustments, those are like the 1%, 2%, 3% raises that you see every year. Not only is the inflation, especially in today's economy, the inflation is actually, you're actually, if you didn't get a 7% raise last year, you're actually making less money to do the same job that you are this year. And the external market, again, is always raising. So somebody that's been at a company for a very long period of time can find wage stagnation to be a pretty significant issue, where you might be underpaid by a pretty significant amount. And if you're not a squeaky wheel and you're not somebody that is testing the market, you may find companies who will say, well, hey, if they're not complaining, let's not do anything about it. In fact, I've been, as a recruiter, I go through and I look at wage ranges, because we do comparisons, internal comps, we call them, and we'll do internal comparisons of certain departments. And as I'm going out and recruiting an external candidate and I'm getting a flavor for what the market is paying, I'll then look at the internal equity of the people who are currently sitting in that classification of job. And a lot of times you'll find departments that are sometimes 20 and 30% below market rate. And usually I'll flag it to the HR department and say, hey, you've got a pay issue in this particular group. And sometimes they'll go in, they'll adjust. Sometimes they don't. But the fact of the matter is, that happens really frequently. In fact, more frequently than you would think. And again, if you're somebody that's sitting in the same job type for a long period of time, or the same job, same role, you've never been promoted, you're not getting these big incremental raises, you're not moving from one level to another, chances are, if you've been there for more than 2, maybe 3 years, the market has probably passed you by. And that's where it would behoove you to really look outside of the market just once every couple of years, just to make sure that you're staying on the up and up. Because if you fall too far behind, it becomes impossible for you to ever catch up to the market unless your company does a major salary adjustment. So again, if it's me, every 2 years, I'm going to go out and dabble in the market, maybe throw an application or two at a few jobs that look to be state of the industry. In other words, they're pay leaders or they're considered alpha employers. And I'm just going to see what's going on, get a flavor for it. And then if I need to leverage that in order to go back and make sure that I'm being paid in my current company, I'm doing that, but I'm doing it very carefully. Again, I'm not going to just run in every single time another company is willing to pay me $2,000 or $3,000 more. You have to be very selective when you use this technique. But as we take ownership in our career, that's something that you definitely want to do. So don't be unprepared, because if you're given a major salary increase when you announce that you intend to leave and they're not giving you a promotional raise in addition to that, it just is an indicator to me that you were underpaid to begin with. And of course, we want to make sure that we're valued properly for our services. But if you're somebody that's struggling in your career and you want to get these big pay increases, I actually specialize in that. I've got a website called alifeafterlayoff.com, and it's loaded with tips and tricks, all from an insider recruiting perspective. But I also share my deepest and most intimate knowledge in the form of some training courses. The first one is the Resume Rocketfuel, and it's designed to teach you how to write your own recruiter-approved or professional quality resume quickly and easily. And that's going to be the first step to attracting those better opportunities. You have to have a way of marketing yourself effectively and showing the world that you bring the goods. And that's what the resume is for. But once you get your foot in the door, get that first phone call, now it's up to you to market yourself properly at each stage to get to the job offer. And that's where the Ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp comes in. It's going to walk you from A to Z through each round of the interview process. And once you get to that offer, we're going to teach you exactly how to make sure that you don't leave a single dime on the table. That alone often covers the price of admission. So it's really worth checking that one out as well. But one of the most important components is making sure that you have a solid network, because a lot of these great opportunities are going to come through active and targeted networking and not through applying for jobs. So if you want to try to skip the recruiter altogether and get right into the interview process, make sure you check out the course Unlocking LinkedIn, which breaks down how to set up your profile, how to attract recruiters so that you can start getting more attention on you, and then ultimately try to get into the interview process without having to go through the gatekeeper. Because trust me, it's a lot easier to get a job when you have people recruiting and pulling for you versus you trying to convince a recruiter to give you the time of day with your resume. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now about how to strategize that aspect of your career. Make sure that you're always keeping abreast of changing market conditions, because listen, in the market that we have today, it can change. It's been changing frequently. It's kind of like whiplash. My neck is starting to hurt from watching the market swing back and forth and back and forth. And it's probably now more important than ever to make sure that you're staying on top of it. As always, appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.